If I told you that the entire War of the Ring almost ended before it began, not upon the slopes of Mount Doom, not at the gates of Minas Tirith, but in a muddy pool near the Dead Marshes, where a lone ranger finally caught the most wretched creature in Middle-earth, would you believe me? Because that is exactly what happened. And the story of how we came to that moment is something Peter Jackson never showed us, something most fans have never truly understood until now. Welcome back, my friends. Today we shall journey deep, truly deep, into the hidden years that changed everything. The 17 years between Bilbo's famous birthday party and the moment Frodo at last left the Shire. In the films, this feels like a few weeks, perhaps a month. Gandalf departs, returns, casts the ring into the fire, and suddenly they are fleeing from the ringwraiths. But in Tolkien's true tale, 17 years pass. 17 years of hunting, searching, failing, and finally, at last, succeeding in capturing a creature named Gollum. This is the story that the new film The Hunt for Gollum will tell. Andy Serkis is directing it. He returns once more to play Gollum. Peter Jackson, Fran Walsh, and Philippa Boyens are producing and writing. And for the first time, we shall see what Gandalf and Aragorn were truly doing during those lost years. We shall witness the manhunt that saved Middle-earth. But here's the truth I wish to share with you. I do not merely wish to speak of what the film will show. I wish to take you through the actual lore, the true tale as Tolkien himself recorded it. For when you understand what truly happened during those 17 years, you will realize that this is no mere side story. This is the foundation upon which everything else rests. Without this hunt, without Aragorn capturing Gollum, the ring would have been found by Sauron decades before Frodo ever left Bag End. So take refreshment, settle yourselves, for we are about to walk through the appendices, through unfinished tales, through the chapter of the Council of Elrond, and through every fragment Tolkien left us concerning the most important manhunt in the history of Middle-earth. Let us begin. You remember that scene? Bilbo's birthday party, the fireworks, the laughter. I don't know half of you half as well as I should like, and I like less than half of you half as well as you deserve. Bilbo puts on the ring and vanishes. Chaos descends upon the party. Later that night, Gandalf confronts him at Bag End. Bilbo departs. Frodo inherits everything, including that little golden ring. Gandalf tells him to keep it secret, keep it safe, and then rides away. In the film, it feels as though he is gone for only a few weeks. He returns, casts the ring into the fire, sees the inscription, and suddenly the Nazgûl are coming and they must flee. But in Tolkien's books, Gandalf does not return for 17 years. Let that truth settle upon your heart. 17 years pass between Bilbo's party in September of the year 3001 of the Third Age, and Gandalf's return to Bag End in April of 3018. Frodo ages from 33 to 50 years old during this time. He is now the same age Bilbo was when he set out with the dwarves upon his own adventure. Think upon what that means. Frodo lived with the one ring in his pocket for 17 years. He wore it occasionally at parties, just as Bilbo had done. He used it to hide from annoying relatives. He had no idea, absolutely no idea, that he was carrying the most dangerous object in existence. And neither did anyone else. Not even Gandalf was certain. That is the heart of the matter. Gandalf suspected. Gandalf worried, but he did not know. In the chapter, The Shadow of the Past, Gandalf explains this to Frodo directly. I watched and I waited. I found no answers in the Shire. I had to look elsewhere. And elsewhere meant the whole of Middle-earth. Gandalf traveled far and wide during those 17 years. He went to Minas Tirith to search ancient archives. He consulted with the wise. He searched for Gollum across thousands of miles. And for most of that time, he found nothing. The trail was cold. The answers were buried in scrolls that no one had read for 3,000 years. Peter Jackson had good reason to compress this timeline. A film needs momentum. You cannot show 17 years of your protagonist sitting at home eating second breakfast, while the wizard is away doing research. Elijah Wood was 19 when filming began. He could not convincingly play a 50-year-old hobbit, so Jackson made the gap feel like months instead of years. It works for the film, but it erases something crucial from the story. What it erases is the weight of Gandalf's doubt. In the books, Gandalf is not certain the ring is the one ring until he tests it in Frodo's fireplace. For 17 years, he moves upon suspicion, upon fear, upon fragments of information that do not quite fit together. He knows Bilbo's ring makes its wearer invisible. He knows Bilbo found it in the goblin tunnels under the Misty Mountains. He knows there is something deeply wrong in how possessive Bilbo became over it. But the One Ring was supposed to be lost forever. It was supposed to lie at the bottom of the Anduin. The idea that a hobbit had simply stumbled upon it in a cave seemed almost impossible, and yet Gandalf could not shake the feeling that something terrible was stirring. Sauron had declared himself openly in Mordor in the year 2951, 50 years before Bilbo's party. The shadow was growing. The Nazgul were stirring. And somewhere out there, a creature named Gollum was wandering the world, and he knew exactly where that ring had come from. He knew because he had possessed it for 500 years before Bilbo took it. If Sauron's servants ever found Gollum, if they ever made him speak, they would learn of the Shire. They would learn the name Baggins, and then everything would be lost. That is why Gandalf began the hunt. Not merely to confirm his suspicions, not at first. He began it because Gollum was a loose end, a dangerous loose end. In the appendices to The Return of the King, Tolkien gives us the timeline. In the year 3001, Gandalf begins to suspect that Bilbo's ring might be the one. In the year 3009, Gandalf and Aragorn begin hunting for Gollum in earnest. For 8 years after that, they search across half of Middle-earth. They fail again and again. Gollum is too slippery, too cunning, too desperate. And then, around the year 3017, Gollum walks right into Mordor of his own will. He is captured by Sauron, he is tortured, and everything changes. The 17-year gap is not empty time in Tolkien's story. It is the foundation upon which everything that follows is built. It is the reason Gandalf is so urgent when he finally returns to Frodo. It is the reason the Nazgul know exactly where to go. It is the reason Aragorn is already waiting in Bree when Frodo arrives, because Aragorn has been part of this hunt for years. He has been preparing for this moment since before Frodo was even aware there was anything to prepare for. Let me paint you the scene. It is the 1st of February in the year 3018 of the Third Age. The dead marshes stretch out beneath a gray and heavy sky, that haunted wasteland east of the Emyn Muil, where the bodies of ancient warriors still float beneath the black water, their pale faces staring upward at any fool who dares to look. This is where Aragorn has been searching. Not for days, not for weeks, but for years off and on. He has wandered the borders of Mordor looking for one creature, and tonight, at dusk, he finally finds him. Gollum is crouched by a stagnant pool, doing what Gollum always does, hunting for fish, muttering to himself, peering into the dark water. He does not see the ranger approaching. He does not hear the footsteps. Aragorn has been tracking men and beasts across the wilds since he was 20 years old. He has spent decades in the service of Rohan and Gondor under false names. He has hunted orcs in the mountains and spies in the cities. Catching one emaciated creature beside a swamp is not the hardest part. The hardest part comes after. In Tolkien's Unfinished Tales, in the essay The Hunt for the Ring, we are given details that most fans have never read. Aragorn captures Gollum on the 1st of February. He must then transport this prisoner, a creature who bites, who scratches, who screams, who never stops trying to escape, across 900 miles of hostile territory, without being caught by Sauron's spies, who are actively searching for Gollum. Because Sauron released Gollum on purpose. Sauron wanted Gollum to lead his servants back to the ring, and now Aragorn has snatched that bait right out from under the trap. Think of the route Aragorn must take. He cannot go south toward Mordor. That is suicide. He cannot go east, that is deeper into enemy territory. He must go north, toward Mirkwood, where King Thranduil's elves can imprison Gollum properly. But between the dead marshes and Mirkwood lies some of the most dangerous country in Middle-earth. The Emyn Muil with its maze of razor-sharp rocks, the Anduin River, wide and treacherous, the eaves of Fangorn Forest, the borders of Lothlorien, where strangers are not exactly welcome. And everywhere, the eyes of the enemy, searching. Aragorn makes a decision that shows exactly why he is the heir of Isildur. He does not take the easy routes. He does not follow the roads. According to Tolkien's notes, he drives Gollum north through the Emyn Muil first, then crosses the Anduin just above Sarngebir. And here is where it becomes almost beyond belief. He crosses the river by tying Gollum to a log and swimming across while pushing it. In February, in the cold, with a prisoner who would happily drown them both if it meant escape. Aragorn reaches the other side and keeps moving. He skirts the western edge of Fangorn Forest. This is decades before the Ents awaken, yet it is still no place to linger. He crosses the river Limelight, then the Nimrodel and the Silverlode. He passes along the very edges of Lothlorien, not entering the Golden Wood itself, but moving close enough that its power may offer some protection. Can you imagine what Galadriel sensed in those days? The air of Isildur dragging the former ring-bearer through the shadow of her forest. She must have known. She always knew. Then comes the hardest part. Aragorn must pass Moria without entering it, pass the Dimril Dale without being seen, pass all the mountain passes crawling with orcs. He crosses the Gladden River, the same river where Isildur died, where the ring was lost 2,500 years before. There is a dark poetry in that. Aragorn, Isildur's heir, passing the place where his ancestor fell, carrying the creature who once found what Isildur lost. 50 days. That is how long it takes. 50 days of walking, hiding, fighting the urge to simply throw Gollum into a ravine and be done with it. 50 days of listening to Precious, we hates it, thieves, thieves. 50 days of keeping this creature alive because Gandalf needs to question him, because the information locked within Gollum's twisted mind might be the only thing that could save Middle-earth. Aragorn does not yet know this for certain, but he trusts Gandalf. He trusts the mission, so he walks 900 miles on faith. That is the kind of man who becomes king. Here is something that does not often receive the attention it deserves. Before Aragorn caught Gollum in the Dead Marshes, he and Gandalf had been hunting the creature for almost a decade, and for most of that decade they failed, again and again and again. They followed cold trails, they searched empty caves, they questioned travelers who had seen nothing, heard nothing, knew nothing. Gollum was a ghost, and Middle-earth is vast. Even two people as skilled as Gandalf and Aragorn can only cover so much ground. The appendices give us the timeline. In the year 3009, Gandalf and Aragorn renew their hunt for Gollum, at intervals during the next 8 years, Tolkien writes. That phrase, at intervals, is important. They were not hunting constantly. They could not. Aragorn had responsibilities to the Dunedain. He had the Rangers of the North to lead. He spent years in Rohan and Gondor fighting under assumed names. Gandalf had the White Council to attend to, Saruman's growing strangeness, and 1,000 other burdens. They hunted when they could, when their other duties allowed. But even when they hunted, they found nothing. Tolkien lists the places they searched, the Vales of Anduin, Mirkwood, Rhovanion, and all the way to the borders of Mordor itself. That is almost the entire eastern half of Middle-earth. Mountain ranges, forests, marshes, rivers, empty wastelands where nothing lives except things that wish to kill you. That covered thousands of miles over 8 years, and Gollum stayed one step ahead. How? How does a creature like Gollum evade the greatest tracker in Middle-earth, and one of the most powerful wizards who ever walked the world? The answer is that Gollum is not stupid. He is wretched, yes. He is broken. He is corrupted, barely holding on to what remains of his sanity. But 500 years of survival have made him cunning in ways that almost nothing else in Middle-earth can match. He knows how to hide. He knows how to move unseen. He knows the dark places, the forgotten tunnels, the routes that no one else uses. And most importantly, he is terrified. Terror keeps you sharp. Terror keeps you alive. There is another factor that Gandalf did not know about until later. During those 8 years, at some point, Gollum actually walked into Mordor of his own will. He entered Sauron's domain. He was captured. He was tortured. And everything changed. The appendices confirm it. At some time during these years, Gollum himself ventured into Mordor and was captured by Sauron. Think upon that for a moment. Gollum in the dungeons of Barad-dûr, Sauron's servants questioning him, torturing him, trying to extract every scrap of knowledge about the ring's location. Gollum had been a ring-bearer for 5 centuries. Sauron would have sensed that immediately. He would have known this creature was important. And Gollum talked. Of course he talked. No one holds out against the torturers of Mordor forever, especially not a broken creature like Gollum. But here is the remarkable thing. He did not tell them everything. He gave them 2 words, 2 names, Baggins and Shire. That was all. Tolkien tells us in The Shadow of the Past that Gollum revealed to his tormentors the names he knew, but he lied about where the Shire was. He told them it was near the Gladden Fields, near his old home, not far away in the west. Was this a deliberate lie? Was Gollum, even in his torment, trying to protect the ring from Sauron in his twisted way? Or was he simply confused, broken, saying whatever he thought might make the pain stop? We cannot know for certain, but the lie bought time, precious time. Here is what makes this even more complicated. Gandalf and Aragorn did not know any of this while it was happening. While they were searching for Gollum in Mirkwood and the Vales of Anduin, Gollum was locked in a dungeon in Mordor. They were looking in all the wrong places because they did not know Sauron had already found him. The hunt was failing not because Aragorn was not skilled enough, but because the prey had already been caught by someone else. Eventually Sauron releases Gollum. Why? Because Sauron is patient, because Sauron is clever, because Sauron knows that Gollum will lead his servants back to the ring, eventually. Sauron sends spies to follow Gollum when he leaves Mordor, but then something goes wrong for the Dark Lord. Aragorn catches Gollum first, right there in the dead marshes, before Sauron's agents can intervene. Years of hunting, years of failure, and then, suddenly, success, at the exact moment when Gollum might have led the enemy straight to the Shire. Aragorn intercepts him. Was it luck? Was it fate? Tolkien would say it was providence, that there is a guiding hand in Middle-earth's history that nudges events toward good outcomes without forcing them. Bilbo finding the ring was meant to be. Gollum being captured by Aragorn instead of recaptured by Sauron was meant to be, not because free will does not exist, but because the music of the Ainur, the great song that created the world, contains themes of redemption that even Morgoth and Sauron cannot fully corrupt. 8 years of failure. And then, when it mattered most, success. That is the nature of hope in Tolkien's world. You keep trying, you keep searching, you keep doing what is right even when it seems pointless. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the world rewards that faithfulness. Aragorn did not give up. Gandalf did not give up. And because they did not give up, they caught Gollum 6 months before the Nazgul came to the Shire. 6 months that made all the difference. Now we must speak of something that happened before Aragorn caught Gollum. Something dark. Something that shows just how far gone this creature truly was. Before Sauron captured him, before the dungeons of Barad-dûr, Gollum made a pact with one of the oldest and most terrible monsters in Middle-earth. He found Shelob, and he worshipped her. Let us go back and set the scene. After Bilbo took the ring in the year 2941, Gollum eventually left his cave under the Misty Mountains. He could not stay there any longer. The ring was gone. His precious was gone. He had to find it. So he crawled out into a world he had not seen in nearly 5 centuries, and he began tracking Bilbo. He followed the trail through Mirkwood. Remember, this is the same route the company of Thorin took, all the way to Dale and the Lonely Mountain. He learned that Bilbo was a hobbit. He learned that Bilbo came from a place called the Shire, far in the west. But Gollum could not find the Shire. He did not know the roads. He did not know the geography. He had been living in a cave eating raw fish and goblins for 500 years. So he wandered. Year after year he wandered. And eventually the darkness inside him, the corruption from all those centuries wearing the ring, began pulling him southward, eastward, toward Mordor. According to Tolkien's timeline, Gollum reached Shelob's lair around the year 2980. That is almost 40 years after Bilbo took the ring and almost 40 years before the War of the Ring begins. He found the secret pass of Cirith Ungol, the Spider's Cleft in the mountains bordering Mordor. And there, in the darkness of those tunnels, he met her. Shelob is ancient. Tolkien tells us she was there before Sauron and before the first stone of Barad-dûr was laid. She is one of the children of Ungoliant, that primordial horror from the First Age who helped Morgoth destroy the 2 trees of Valinor. Shelob came to those mountains at some forgotten time in the past and never left. She feasts on anything that wanders into her webs. Orcs, men, elves, whatever she can catch. The orcs of Cirith Ungol call her her ladyship and are absolutely terrified of her. Even Sauron leaves her alone. He calls her his cat. A creature who guards the pass and occasionally eats the prisoners he sends her way. And Gollum. Gollum looked at this horror and saw opportunity. Tolkien writes that Gollum bowed to her and worshipped her when they met. Think upon what that means. Here is a creature who spent 500 years obsessing over a golden ring, calling it his precious, his birthday present. And now he finds something else to worship, something that can give him what he wants. Shelob does not care about rings. Shelob cares about food. And Gollum realizes that if he brings her food, she will let him pass through her tunnels. She will let him come and go as he pleases. She might even help him get what he really wants. The orcs of the tower have a name for him, her sneak. They know about his relationship with Shelob. They have seen him slipping in and out of the tunnels. They know he brings her things. They know he has some kind of arrangement with her. What they do not know, what nobody knows, is that Gollum is already planning to use this arrangement against the ring's new bearer, whoever that turns out to be. This is decades before Frodo. Gollum does not yet know Frodo exists, but he knows that someday, somehow, someone will come to Mordor carrying his precious. And when they do, Gollum will lead them to Shelob. She will kill them. She will eat them. And Gollum will take back what is his from whatever is left in her webs. That is the plan. He makes this plan 40 years before he ever meets Frodo. 40 years of scheming. 40 years of waiting. 40 years of worshipping a giant spider because she is useful to him. What does this tell us about Gollum? It tells us that the pitiful, half-reformed creature we see in the Two Towers, the one who almost reaches out to touch Frodo's sleeping face, exists alongside something much darker. Gollum is not just corrupted, he is calculating, even through the madness, even through the split personality. Some part of him is always planning, always scheming, always looking for an angle. The deal with Shelob proves that. It also tells us something about how Gollum survived Mordor. When he wandered into Sauron's domain and was captured, he already knew the back routes. He had already spent years exploring Cirith Ungol and the paths around the Ethel Duath. The reason Sauron let him go, the reason Sauron thought Gollum would be useful as bait, is partly because Gollum knew how to get in and out of Mordor through ways that most creatures could not survive. Shelob's lair would kill almost anyone, but Gollum had a deal. After the War of the Ring is over, Tolkien never tells us what happened to Shelob. Sam wounds her badly with Sting, but there is no indication that she dies. She crawls back into her hole, bleeding that pale ichor, and presumably begins to recover. Did she survive? Is she still lurking there, deep within the shadowed mountains, ever waiting in silence? We cannot know for certain. Yet one truth remains clear. Without Gollum's twisted pact with that ancient horror, Frodo and Sam would never have discovered the hidden path into Mordor. Gandalf knew of the pass called Cirith Ungol, yet he knew nothing of the spider's lair that guarded it. Only Gollum had walked those tunnels before. Only Gollum understood their winding ways. Behold now the dark and bitter irony woven by fate. The very pact Gollum forged in shadows to betray the ring-bearer became the knowledge that allowed Frodo to enter the Black Land at all. The same path he prepared for murder turned into the road of salvation. Thus does Tolkien delight in such inversions of destiny, evil schemes that twist back upon themselves, dark designs that unwittingly serve the light. For decades, Gollum worshipped Shelob, planning to feed her the bearer of the ring. Yet in the end, it was his knowledge of her lair that ensured the ring's destruction. The spider received no feast. Gollum never reclaimed his precious, and Middle-earth was saved, in part, by a covenant made in utter darkness for the darkest of purposes. We have spoken of Gollum's capture by Sauron. We have spoken of the torment he endured within the halls of Barad-dûr. Yet now we must turn our gaze to what he truly revealed. For this is the pivot upon which the entire tale turns. This is the moment that set all else in motion. Under the shadow of torment, Gollum uttered two words, Shire and Baggins. And those two simple words nearly brought doom upon all of Middle-earth. First, let us recall what Sauron already knew in the depths of his malice. He knew the One Ring still existed, for he himself had forged it in the fires of Mount Doom. He knew it had been lost when Isildur fell at the Gladden Fields in the second year of the Third Age. For 3,000 years he had sought it, slowly rebuilding his strength, biding his time in darkness. Through his spies and the Seeing Stones, he also knew that something of note had occurred at the Battle of Five Armies in the year 2941. He knew a hobbit named Bilbo Baggins had played a part. He may even have suspected that Bilbo had found something of great power within those goblin tunnels beneath the Misty Mountains. But certainty eluded him. Then Gollum, driven by his own hunger, walked willingly into Mordor. Sauron's servants seized him almost at once. When they examined the wretched creature and felt the lingering corruption of the ring that had clung to him for 5 centuries, they understood what prize had fallen into their hands. This being had once borne the One Ring, not one of the lesser rings, not one of the 7 or the 9, but Sauron's own masterwork. The resonance was unmistakable, and if Gollum had possessed the ring and no longer held it, then another must have taken it, someone who might still bear it even now. The torment began. Tolkien does not linger on the grim details, for such was not his way. Yet he makes plain that what Gollum suffered was terrible beyond words. In the shadow of the past, Gandalf tells Frodo that Gollum had been to Mordor and that all that he knew he revealed under threat of pain. Yet the notes of Christopher Tolkien in The Hunt for the Ring suggest the suffering ran far deeper. Gollum was held for years. He was questioned again and again. Sauron himself may have gazed upon him in those black halls. And through all the agony, Gollum surrendered only 2 words, Baggins and Shire. The name Baggins came easily, for it had burned in his mind like fire ever since the riddle game in the goblin tunnels. Baggins, we hates it forever. That name would never remain hidden. But the Shire, that was another matter, far more veiled. Gollum had followed Bilbo's trail as far as Dale. He had asked questions in the shadows. He had learned that the Hobbit came from a land called the Shire, somewhere far in the west. Yet he had never set foot there. He did not truly know its place upon the map, only that it lay distant from Mirkwood and the Misty Mountains, beyond the edge of his known world. So when Sauron's torturers demanded the location of this Shire, Gollum told them it lay near the Gladden Fields, close to his own ancient home. Was this a deliberate deception? Even in the depths of his torment, was some twisted fragment of Gollum still trying to keep the ring from Sauron? Not for Frodo's sake, but for his own? After all, the ring remained his precious. He still longed to reclaim it. He did not wish Sauron to possess it. Perhaps in the broken recesses of his mind, he chose to mislead the enemy. Tolkien hints at this in Unfinished Tales. He writes that Sauron perceived something indomitable within Gollum, a spirit that even the torturers of Mordor could not wholly break. That is a wondrous and terrible thought. Indomitable. This wretched, pitiable being still carried within him a spark that the Dark Lord could not fully extinguish. Was it merely his mad obsession with the ring? His burning hatred of Sauron for the pain inflicted upon him? Or was there something deeper, some faint remnant of the hobbit Smeagol once had been, buried so far within that even the eye of Sauron could not reach it? Whatever the cause, the deception held for a time. Sauron sent his servants to search near the Gladden Fields, near Mirkwood, and in all the places Gollum had named. They found nothing. The Dunedain of the north spread false tidings. Saruman's own spies clouded the waters for their own purposes. And the true Shire, that quiet, gentle land in Eriador, remained hidden. The hobbits went about their lives unknowing, tilling the earth, sharing meals, grumbling about the Sackville Bagginses, utterly unaware that the Dark Lord himself was hunting for one who bore their name. Yet Sauron is ever patient. In time, through other channels, through Saruman's growing treason and the dark intelligence of the Nazgul, he learned the true location of the Shire. It took years. Nearly a decade passed after Gollum's capture before the ring-wraiths at last rode forth toward the Shire in September of 3018. But ride they did. They rode because of those 2 fateful words, Baggins and Shire. All that followed, the pursuit through the old forest, the clash upon Weathertop, the desperate flight to Rivendell, all of it traces its beginning to what Gollum spoke in the dungeons of Mordor. 2 words. That was all it took. Bilbo had given Gollum his name during the riddle game as a simple courtesy of introduction. He thought nothing of it at the time. Why should he? He was only a hobbit, and hobbits are courteous folk. One introduces oneself when meeting a stranger. Yet that small act of politeness nearly unraveled the fate of the world. Such is the corruption of the ring. It twists even good things into instruments of ruin, even courtesy, even simple manners. Bilbo's innocent words, "I am Bilbo Baggins of the Shire," became the key that almost opened the door to Sauron's triumph. What then saved Middle-earth? Time. Those long years of misdirection. Those years in which Sauron's servants searched in the wrong places. They granted Gandalf the time he needed to uncover the truth. They gave Aragorn the time to capture Gollum. They gave Frodo the time to depart the Shire before the Nazgul arrived. Not much time, yet enough. For in Tolkien's world, victory often comes not through overwhelming might, but through small advantages, fortunate timing, and the quiet accumulation of countless humble choices that together tip the scales toward hope. Let us now turn our gaze from Gollum to Gandalf. While Aragorn wandered the wilds in pursuit of the creature, Gandalf pursued his own solitary quest for truth. and the revelation that at last confirmed all his fears, the proof that Bilbo's ring was indeed the One Ring, came from a single ancient parchment, long buried in the archives of Minas Tirith, a scroll that had rested there, forgotten, for nearly 3,000 years. A scroll that, in all of Middle-earth, only two beings had ever truly read. It is known as the Scroll of Isildur. Isildur himself set down its words in the second year of the Third Age, soon after the Great War that overthrew Sauron for the first time. He was then in Minas Tirith, called Minas Anor in those days, preparing to march north to Arnor with his host. Yet before he departed, he recorded all he knew of the ring, its appearance, its strange nature, and above all, the fiery inscription that appeared upon it when heated. You may recall that scene in the films, Gandalf alone in a vast library, surrounded by flickering candles and towering shelves of ancient scrolls. That was the great archive of Minas Tirith. Gandalf returned there many times across those 17 years, seeking any scrap of knowledge that might illuminate the nature of Bilbo's ring. And at last, after years of patient searching, he found Isildur's scroll. It described the moment Isildur cut the ring from Sauron's hand. According to Gandalf's recounting at the Council of Elrond, Isildur wrote, "It was hot when I first took it, hot as a gleed, and my hand was scorched, so that I doubt if ever again I shall be free of the pain of it." The ring had but lately rested upon Sauron's finger. Isildur described that hand as black, yet burning like living fire, the very fire that claimed the life of Gil-galad when he seized it in battle. The ring retained that heat for a time, but the crucial passage came next. Isildur beheld writing upon the ring while it still glowed. The writing upon it, which at first was as clear as red flame, fadeth, and is now only barely to be read. He knew not the tongue, nor the meaning, yet he copied the letters faithfully before they vanished. And then he added one final hope. Maybe, where the gold is made hot again, the writing would be refreshed. That was the key. In the year 3017, Gandalf read these words and understood he now possessed a way to test Bilbo's ring. If it was truly the one, fire would reveal the inscription. If not, then it was merely another enchanted ring, suspicious, perhaps perilous, but not the instrument that would decide the fate of all Middle-earth. Consider what this meant for Gandalf's heart across those long years. For decades he had labored under suspicion and growing dread, striving to convince himself that his fears were unfounded. The One Ring was believed lost forever. The notion that it had simply appeared in a hobbit's pocket during a game of riddles seemed beyond belief. Yet now he held a test, a clear and final test. All he need do was return to Bag End, cast the ring into the fire, and behold the truth. And so, in April of 3018, 17 long years after Bilbo's birthday feast, he did exactly that. The inscription blazed forth in letters of fire, the black speech of Mordor written in Elvish script. One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all and in the darkness bind them. Gandalf's deepest fear stood revealed in flame. Now comes a detail often overlooked, yet rich with meaning. At the Council of Elrond, Gandalf tells Boromir that this scroll had remained unread, I guess by any save Saruman and myself, since the kings failed. The line of the kings of Gondor had ended in the year 2050 of the Third Age, nearly 1,000 years before the War of the Ring. For almost 1,000 years that scroll lay forgotten in the archives. None knew its importance. The stewards of Gondor tended the records, yet their eyes were fixed upon recent wars, politics, and the defense of the realm. An ancient writing about a ring believed lost forever? It held no interest, save for Saruman. Gandalf reveals that Saruman had studied long in those same archives. Saruman the White, chief of the Istari and head of the White Council. Saruman the White, chief of the Istari and head of the White Council, he too had read the scroll. He knew the test. He knew how the One Ring could be revealed. Yet he spoke of it to no one. For by then, Saruman had already begun to fall. He desired the ring for himself. He was already weaving his betrayal in secret. The knowledge contained in that ancient parchment was too precious to share. Thus, the sequence unfolded. Saruman read the scroll many decades before Gandalf ever laid eyes upon it. Saruman learned the secret of the test. Saruman began his own search for the ring. He sent spies to the Gladden fields. He scoured the very rivers where Gollum had first found it long ago. Meanwhile, the ring itself lay quietly in a humble hobbit hole in the Shire, and Saruman knew nothing of it. His search proved as fruitless as Sauron's own. The ring was hidden. The ring was waiting, in the last place any eye of power would think to look. Then Gandalf read the same scroll. Gandalf gained the same knowledge, but unlike Saruman, he used that knowledge not to claim the ring, but to warn Frodo, to set the quest in motion, and to strive for its destruction. The same truth, two utterly opposite paths. Herein lies the difference between wisdom and cunning, between a true servant of the light and one who has surrendered to pride. Saruman knew, and that knowledge corrupted him. Gandalf knew, and that knowledge gave him the strength to act rightly. The archives of Minas Tirith, dusty scrolls, forgotten lore, ancient writings that few any longer remembered. In Tolkien's world, such things mattered deeply. History matters. Memory matters. The reason Gandalf could help save Middle-earth was in part because he was willing to pore over old documents that others had long since forgotten. There is a quiet beauty in that truth. In an age of swords and sorcery, the turning point of fate came when a wizard sat in a library and read. Denethor, steward of Gondor, even mocked Gandalf for this very habit. When Gandalf came to study the archives, Denethor said words to the effect, "If you seek only records of ancient days, then read on. But unless you possess greater skill than even Saruman, you will find nothing that is not already known to me." Denethor believed he knew all that mattered. Denethor believed the archives held no more secrets. Yet Gandalf found the one scroll that would change the course of the age, a scroll Denethor had never even known existed. Pride blinds even the wise. Humility opens hidden doors. Gandalf's patient willingness to search through dusty tomes year after year was precisely what helped deliver Middle-earth from darkness. Here is a truth that still astonishes me whenever I reflect upon it. Legolas, the same Legolas who later joined the Fellowship, who fought beside Gimli and surfed down the stairs of Helm's Deep upon a shield, did not come to Rivendell as some honored diplomat. He did not come because Thranduil wished elven voices at a great council. He came bearing ill tidings. He came because Gollum had escaped, and someone had to tell Gandalf. Let us step back a little. After Aragorn's long and grueling 50-day journey through the wilds, he delivered Gollum into the keeping of Thranduil's halls in Mirkwood on the 21st day of March in the year 3018. 2 days later, Gandalf arrived to question the prisoner. What he learned in those shadowed halls convinced him that time was running out. He departed Mirkwood, traveled once more to Minas Tirith to confirm his fears with Isildur's scroll, and then hastened back to the Shire to warn Frodo. That was in April and May of 3018. Meanwhile, Gollum remained imprisoned in the dungeons of Thranduil. Yet the Wood Elves are a kind folk. That has ever been their way. They had treated Thorin and his company with relative mercy decades earlier, offering wine and regular meals rather than chains and darkness. They extended the same mercy to Gollum, despite all that he was and all that he had done. They pitied him. Gandalf had asked them to treat the creature with kindness, holding out the faint hope that perhaps, in some small way, Gollum might yet be healed. So instead of leaving him forever in darkness, they began taking him outside under guard, supervised walks beneath the trees, fresh air, and the chance to climb. There was one tall tree in particular that Gollum grew fond of. The guards watched him closely. They never took their eyes from him, but Gollum was patient. Gollum knew how to wait. On a night late in June of 3018, most likely the 28th according to Tolkien's notes, Gollum climbed his favorite tree and refused to descend. This had happened before. The guards were not alarmed. They would simply wait. He would have to come down eventually. They settled themselves at the foot of the tree. Night fell. It was dark, moonless, and starless. One of those nights when one cannot see one's own hand before one's face. And then the orcs attacked. This was no chance encounter. Sauron had been tracking what became of Gollum ever since Aragorn had snatched him from beneath the enemy's gaze. Sauron knew Gollum was now in Mirkwood. Sauron knew the creature was valuable, both as a source of further knowledge and as living bait for the ring. So he sent orcs from the mountains with strict orders: rescue Gollum at any cost. The assault was sudden and fierce. The orcs, unused to fighting beneath the trees, came with numbers and the advantage of surprise. The elven guards fought valiantly, but in the chaos and the enveloping darkness, Gollum slipped away. By the time dawn broke, he was gone. The elves followed his trail and the footprints of the orcs, but the tracks led toward Dol Guldur, the old fortress of the necromancer, now once more occupied by 3 of the Nazgul. The elves would not follow that path into such darkness. Gollum had escaped, and someone had to bear the news to Gandalf. Thranduil chose Legolas, his own son. Consider the weight of that choice. This was no trivial message entrusted to an ordinary messenger. This was the Elven king sending his heir to deliver tidings of grave failure to one of the mightiest among the wise. Legolas rode for Rivendell, a journey of many weeks, carrying the heavy knowledge that the prisoner Gandalf had so urgently needed was once more free. At the Council of Elrond, we finally hear Legolas deliver his news, and the way Tolkien sets it down is filled with sorrow. Legolas says, "Alas, alas, the tidings that I was sent to bring must now be told. They are not good. But only here have I learned how evil they may seem to this company. Smeagol, who is now called Gollum, has escaped. When he left Mirkwood, Legolas did not yet grasp the full weight of what had occurred. He knew Gollum mattered greatly to Gandalf. He knew losing the prisoner was a serious failure. But only at Rivendell, only after hearing the full tale of the ring, did Legolas understand how grave their mistake had been. Aragorn's response was swift and sharp. "Escaped? That is ill news indeed. We shall all rue it bitterly, I fear." How came the folk of Thranduil to fail in their trust? There was an edge in that question. Aragorn had walked 900 miles and risked his life to deliver that creature. Now the elves had let him slip away. Yet Legolas did not grow defensive. He explained the kindness shown to Gollum, the walks beneath the trees, the night of the attack, the escape that came not from lack of vigilance, but perhaps from overkindliness. That phrase lingers like a shadow, overkindliness. The elves had been too merciful to Gollum. They had given him chances. They had shown him compassion, and that very mercy allowed him to escape. Does that render their mercy wrong? Tolkien does not believe so. Later in the tale, it is precisely that same spirit, the refusal to kill Gollum when the chance arose, that ultimately helps bring the quest to its strange and wondrous conclusion. Frodo's pity, Bilbo's pity before him, even the elves' perhaps misplaced kindness, all of it kept Gollum alive long enough to fulfill his final unwilling role upon the slopes of Mount Doom. Yet at the council, in that moment, it felt like catastrophe. Gollum was free. He knew the ring existed. He knew it was called Precious. He knew the name Baggins. He would surely hunt for it. And now, no one watched over him. No one restrained him. No one stood between him and Sauron's servants. Here, however, comes a twist of fate. After escaping Mirkwood, Gollum did not head west toward the Shire. Instead, he turned toward the mountains. He made his way to Moria. He knew of the ancient dwarf kingdom, as did many in Middle-earth. He believed he could hide there, deep in the darkness, in places where few would dare to follow. He could hunt orcs and goblins. He could fish in the underground pools. He could wait. And that is where he was when the Fellowship passed through Moria in January of the following year. They caught fleeting glimpses of him. Frodo saw his eyes gleaming in the dark. Gandalf was aware that something followed them, had been aware since before Moria. Yet they could not catch him. Not in those endless tunnels, not while they themselves fled from orcs and the terror of a Balrog. Gollum slipped away once more. He followed the Fellowship all the way to Lothlorien, though the power of Galadriel kept him from entering the Golden Wood. Eventually, he caught up with Frodo and Sam after the breaking of the Fellowship. Thus, Legolas came to Rivendell as a bearer of failure. And because he was there, because he heard the full tale of the ring and offered himself, he became one of the 9 Walkers. Failure led to redemption. Ill tidings led to Legolas joining the Fellowship. He was not there because the elves sought representation at the council. He was there because he felt responsible. His people had let Gollum escape. Now he would help set right what had gone wrong. Every member of the Fellowship had their own reason for being there. Gimli came because Gloin feared for the dwarves of Erebor, and because Sauron's messengers had been inquiring about Bilbo and the ring. Boromir came because of a prophetic dream concerning Isildur's bane. Frodo came as the ring-bearer, but Legolas? Legolas came bearing news of Gollum's escape. That was his beginning. And it ties directly back to the long hunt that Aragorn had completed only 6 months earlier. Now let us speak of something that most hobbits never knew, and that many readers of The Lord of the Rings overlook upon first reading. The Shire, that peaceful land of gardens, birthday parties, and comfortable smiles, had been guarded for more than 1,000 years by grim men in gray cloaks. These rangers of the north, the Dunedain, Aragorn's own people, watched its borders, fought unseen threats, and sometimes gave their lives in silence so that the hobbits could live in peace. The hobbits never heard their names. You must understand the deeper history to grasp the weight of this truth. Long ago, before the Shire even existed as we know it, there stood a great northern kingdom called Arnor, founded by Elendil himself, the same Elendil who fought beside Gil-galad in the last alliance against Sauron. Arnor was the twin realm of Gondor, two kingdoms of the Dunedain, separated by distance yet bound by blood and ancient purpose. Arnor once covered most of the northwestern lands of Middle-earth, including the very region that would one day become the Shire. But Arnor fell. It fractured into smaller kingdoms after disputes of succession, and those kingdoms, in turn, were destroyed one by the Witch King of Angmar over the long centuries. The last king of the final remnant realm, Arthedain, perished in the year 1974 of the Third Age, more than 1,000 years before the War of the Ring. After that, the Dunedain of the North had no throne, no cities, no kingdom left. What they still possessed was duty. The surviving Dunedain became the Rangers of the North. They wandered the wild lands of Eriador, protecting ordinary folk from dangers they never even knew existed. Orcs descending from the mountains, wolves from the north, and evil things stirring in ancient barrows and forgotten ruins. The people of Bree thought the Rangers strange and dangerous wanderers. The hobbits of the Shire barely thought of them at all. Yet the Rangers were always there, watching, fighting, sometimes dying, so that others might live in peace. This was Aragorn's heritage. This was the legacy of his line. For more than 1,000 years, the heirs of Isildur led the Rangers in secrecy, waiting for the day when the throne of Gondor might be reclaimed and the Northern Kingdom restored. In the meantime, they protected the descendants of those who once dwelt in their ancestors' lands, including the hobbits. Tolkien makes this plain in the prologue to The Lord of the Rings. He writes that the hobbits flourished under the Rangers' unseen protection, never knowing who guarded them. The Rangers patrolled the borders. They turned aside threats before those threats could reach Hobbit lands. And the hobbits continued their simple lives, complaining about the weather, arguing over family trees, completely unaware that grim-faced warriors in gray cloaks were bleeding and dying for them in the wild lands beyond their peaceful borders. This guardianship grew even more urgent when Gandalf began to suspect that Bilbo's ring might indeed be the One Ring. According to Tolkien's appendices, around the year 3000, 18 years before the War of the Ring truly began, Gandalf asked the Rangers to redouble their watch upon the Shire. More patrols, greater vigilance. For if that ring was what he feared, then the quiet land of the hobbits would soon draw the gaze of very dangerous powers indeed. And the hobbits had no means to defend themselves against such darkness. Consider what this meant for the Rangers. They were asked to protect a people who did not even acknowledge their existence, folk who would likely flee in terror at the mere sight of a tall, weather-beaten ranger, folk who had no inkling that evil was gathering, that shadows were lengthening, that somewhere in the east the Dark Lord was searching for something hidden within their gentle countryside. Yet the Rangers accepted the task without complaint. They did so because it was right. They did so because their forefathers had sworn ancient oaths. They did so because Gandalf asked. Then, in September of 3018, the Nazgul came. The Rangers at Sarn Ford, the southern crossing of the Brandywine River, were the first to see them. 9 black riders, cloaked in darkness, mounted upon horses that breathed fear itself. The Rangers tried to bar their way. They actually stood and fought the Ringwraiths. Think upon the courage that required. These were creatures whose very presence could break the will of hardened warriors, servants of Sauron unseen in Middle-earth for centuries. Yet the Rangers of the North stood at that river crossing and said, "You shall not pass." Of course, they could not prevail. The Nazgul scattered them and crossed into the Shire. But here is the telling detail. The Ringwraiths did not destroy the Rangers utterly. Tolkien tells us they drove them off rather than annihilating them. Why? Because time pressed upon them. They had at last learned the true location of the Shire after years of searching in vain. They would not waste precious moments in prolonged battle when the ring was so near. So they broke through and rode onward, leaving wounded Rangers in their wake. Some of those brave men surely perished that day. We do not know the exact number. Tolkien gives us no casualty list for the fight at Sarn Ford. Yet men fell there in a battle that no hobbit ever heard of. On the very day Frodo was celebrating his birthday at Bag End, while hobbits laughed, ate cake, and drank ale, grim warriors were dying in the wild to slow the advance of the Nine. And even after Sarn Ford, the Rangers did not relent. They could not stop the Nazgul, but they could send warning. They could pass messages. they could prepare. That is why Aragorn was already waiting in Bree when Frodo and his companions arrived. The Ranger's hidden network had told him what was coming. When the four terrified hobbits reached the prancing pony, Aragorn was there, watching, ready, because the Rangers had been tracking their journey ever since they left the Shire. This is one of the deepest beauties of Tolkien's world. The heroes we see clearly, Frodo, Sam, Aragorn, Gandalf, were supported by hundreds of unseen hands. Anonymous warriors who died at lonely river crossings. Elves carrying messages through distant woods. Dwarves guarding ancient secrets. The whole of Middle-earth was bound together by threads of loyalty and quiet duty stretching back across the centuries. Frodo did not save Middle-earth alone. He could not have done so. No one could. He succeeded because countless others, most of whom he never met, did their part, often without ever understanding the true weight of their sacrifice. The Rangers of the North, the Dunedain, Aragorn's people, they protected the Shire for more than 1,000 years. And when the final test came, they stood at Sarn Ford and bought precious time with their blood. That was who they were. That was what they gave. And most hobbits lived and died never knowing their names. Here is something that still troubles me when I reflect upon it. During all those long years of questioning, first by Sauron in the dungeons of Mordor, then by Gandalf in the halls of Thranduil, Gollum never revealed his most dangerous secret. He gave up the name Baggins. He gave up the word Shire. He spoke of Bilbo and the riddle game and how he had been cheated. But he never breathed a word about Cirith Ungol. He never mentioned the secret stairs. He never spoke of Shelob. Consider what that means. Gandalf questioned Gollum at length in Thranduil's dungeons. This was Gandalf, one of the Astari, one of the wisest beings still walking Middle-earth, a being who had walked the world for thousands of years and knew well how to draw forth hidden truths. Yet Gollum kept the secret of the back door into Mordor completely hidden from him. Why? Because Gollum was already planning to use that path for himself. Remember, he had made his dark pact with Shelob decades earlier. He knew those tunnels. He knew the hidden stairs. He knew a way into and out of Mordor that avoided the Black Gate entirely. That knowledge was his secret weapon, his one true advantage. He would not surrender it. Not to Sauron, not to Gandalf, not to anyone. Let us trace how Gollum first discovered this path. Around the year 2980, nearly 40 years before the War of the Ring, Gollum was drifting ever eastward, drawn by the lingering call of the ring toward Mordor. He had been searching for Bilbo for decades. He had followed the trail as far as Dale and the Lonely Mountain. He had learned of the Shire, yet could not find it. Something darker kept pulling him east. He found the stairs of Cirith Ungol almost by chance. They were not marked on any map known to the wise. The elves knew the pass existed and that something terrible dwelt there, but no one used it. No one wished to. Gollum, however, feared no darkness. He had lived in darkness for 500 years. He crept into those mountains, found the hidden ways, and encountered Shelob. Instead of being devoured, he made himself useful. He brought her offerings. He bowed and worshipped her. In return, he learned her tunnels. Most importantly, he learned how to avoid her. There were side passages in that labyrinth, narrow ways too small for Shelob to enter. Gollum was small enough to use them. Over the years, he came to know every twist and turning of that dreadful place. When Sauron's servants later captured Gollum near the borders of Mordor, they let him out again through Cirith Ungol. Tolkien tells us in Unfinished Tales that the orcs were ordered to let him pass. Sauron was using him as bait. The route they chose was Shelob's route. The orcs called Gollum her sneak. They knew of his arrangement with the spider and did not interfere. So when Gollum escaped from Mirkwood and eventually found Frodo and Sam, he carried this forbidden knowledge locked deep within his mind. He knew a way into Mordor that bypassed the Black Gate, a way that was perilous beyond measure, yet possible. He revealed nothing of it until Frodo asked in the Two Towers. When Frodo and Sam stood before the impassable Black Gate and despaired, Gollum mentioned that there was another way, a secret way. At first he was reluctant, pretending he was granting them a great favor. In a twisted sense, he was, except he had always planned to lead them straight to Shelob. She would kill them. He would take the ring from their bodies. That had been his design from the beginning. But here Providence, as Tolkien would name it, intervened. Gollum led them to Cirith Ungol exactly as he intended. Shelob attacked exactly as he expected. but Sam fought back with fury born of love and desperation. Sam wounded the great spider with Sting, the very elvish blade that Bilbo had carried in the goblin tunnels, the blade Gollum had hated since the riddle game. Shelob retreated, bleeding her pale ichor. Frodo survived, though stung. Sam carried on. And so the secret path that Gollum had guarded for decades, the path he meant to use for murder, became the very road by which the ring was carried into the heart of Mordor and destroyed. Tolkien delights in such reversals. Evil schemes that collapse upon themselves, dark plans that unwittingly serve the cause of light. Gollum kept the secret of Cirith Ungol so he could betray the ring-bearer. Yet by keeping it secret, he ensured that no one else knew of it either. Sauron did not reinforce that pass as heavily as he might have. Thus, Frodo and Sam were able to pass where otherwise they might have been stopped. Had Gollum told Gandalf about the path, the knowledge might have spread. Saruman might have learned of it. Sauron might have placed more guards. The way might have become impossible. Instead, the secret remained hidden until the exact moment it was needed, until Frodo required it, until the quest itself demanded it. The path that Gollum discovered through his own wickedness became, against his will, a path of redemption, not for Gollum himself, but for all of Middle-earth. Gollum was never redeemed. He fell into the fire, still clutching his precious, destroyed by the very thing he desired most. Yet his secret knowledge, his decades of scheming, unwittingly contributed to the victory of the free peoples. That is how the music of the Ainur moves in Tolkien's world. The darkness believes it is in control. Evil thinks it is weaving the threads. But something greater is at work, turning even the deeds of the wicked toward unforeseen good. Gollum thought he was clever. He thought guarding the secret of Cirith Ungol gave him power. And it did, yet not the power he imagined. It gave him the power to help save the world, while trying with all his heart to destroy it. The new film will surely need to address these hidden layers. If it is truly telling the story of the hunt for Gollum, it must show the interrogations. Gandalf asking careful questions, Gollum answering some while fiercely guarding others. The audience must feel that Gollum is holding something back, a secret path, a monster in the dark, a weapon he is saving for his own bitter purpose. I want to draw all these threads together now, for here is the profound truth about the hunt for Gollum. It did not prevent the War of the Ring. In many ways, it may have helped begin it. For long years, Sauron had searched for the One Ring in blindness. He knew it existed. He knew it lay somewhere in the west, but he could not find it. His servants combed the Gladden fields again and again without success. His spies wandered Middle-earth and returned with empty hands. The ring remained hidden. The ring waited patiently. Then Gollum walked into Mordor, and everything changed. Suddenly, Sauron had a name, Baggins. He had a place, the Shire, perhaps near the Gladden fields. He had confirmation that the ring was with the hobbits. This was the first concrete intelligence he had received in 3,000 years, the first real lead. And almost immediately after gaining that knowledge, Aragorn snatched Gollum away. Imagine Sauron's fury. He had tortured Gollum. He had extracted what he needed. He had released him as bait. And then a lone ranger stole the creature before the trap could close. Worse still, that ranger took Gollum to Mirkwood, where Gandalf himself appeared to question him. Now the wise knew what Sauron knew. The game had shifted. So there it is, the 17 years that seemed to vanish from the tale, the 900-mile ordeal through the wild, the 8 years of fruitless searching, the dark pact with the spider. The 2 words that nearly doomed the world, the scroll that waited unread for 1,000 years, the messenger of failure. The unseen guardians, the secret path, and the hunt that, in the end, helped ignite the War of the Ring. This is the story the new film will tell. Andy Serkis directing, Peter Jackson, Fran Walsh, and Philippa Boyens producing and writing. They are returning to New Zealand, to Weta, to the team that brought us the original trilogy. And they are bringing to life a tale that Tolkien wrote in the margins, in the appendices, in unfinished tales. A story that most readers have never fully understood. When I think upon this coming film, my heart stirs not merely with anticipation for more tales of Middle-earth, but with a deeper joy. For this is the Lord of the Rings we have never truly seen upon the screen. Here is Aragorn, long before the world knew him as the heir of Isildur, only a grim ranger walking the wilds in secrecy and endurance. Here is Gandalf in the midst of his long and lonely search, still uncertain, still hoping against hope that his fears are unfounded. Here is Gollum at his most desperate and most dangerous, hunted by enemies on every side, driven by a hunger older than the mountains themselves. This is no invented tale added for spectacle. This is the story Tolkien himself wrote, in quiet corners, in appendices, in unfinished fragments. And it matters. It is not merely another tale of a ranger chasing a monster through the wilderness. It is the very foundation upon which the War of the Ring was built. To understand the hunt is to understand why the Fellowship was formed. To understand Gandalf's 17 years of doubt and labor is to understand the urgency with which he returned to Frodo. To understand Aragorn's long years of silent service is to understand why he was worthy to claim the crown at last.